My favorite subject. Fruit trees, shade trees, timber trees, elms and oaks, and cedars and sumacs. But what do we do about trees? How do they relate to each other? How do we relate to trees? And I think about trees all the time. In the morning, at work, at the dinner table. They even wake me up at night. I'm worrying about them. And they're complicated. So this talk is about my way of trying to understand trees. So let's think about trees in three ways. First, how do we depend on trees? And second, how do trees depend on each other? How are they interdependent? And third, how are we agents of their interdependence? And if it is any comfort, questions about trees are nothing new. So to consider how we depend on trees, let's go all the way back. And you know this story. It's about a couple who had trouble with trees. It comes from Genesis. I'll quote, "And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Every tree of the garden thou mayst freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die." We all know how this worked out. The devil took the form of a serpent. The serpent tempted Eve and Adam and convinced them that if they ate the apple, they would not die, but rather they would have the knowledge and would be like God, and God did not want that. They ate the apple, and that was the wrong choice. And so that they would not eat from the tree of life and therefore live forever, they were cast out of the Garden of Eden. And we like to believe that we are wise now and that we would make the right choice. But would we? If Eve were to offer me that tempting apple, I must say I would make the wrong choice, and I would take a bite. The tree in that garden were planted, the trees there were planted for our sustenance. And we may have had to learn that the hard way, but we now know that whether the trees are planted in the garden or living wild in the woods, we utterly depend on them. We know that through photosynthesis, trees produce oxygen. The very air we breathe comes from trees. There may not be a tree of life, but trees give us the breath of life. Trees give us fruit, apples and pears and peaches and plums. Trees give us nuts, chestnuts and walnuts and almonds. Trees give us medicine, tea from the sassafras and aspirin from the willow. Trees give us chocolate. Trees give us coffee. Trees give us water. They break the force of the rain, and the water drips gently into the humus of the forest floor, which soaks up the water like a sponge. And we tap this filtered water with our wells. Trees give us wood. I never feel guilty about lumber, even though a tree died for that lumber. Wood is good. I feel good about cutting trees that ought to be cut. When a pitch pine, like the ones over there at West Chalk Woods, is infested with a southern pine beetle, you can sense the suffering of the tree. Up and down the tree are 1,000 globs of sap, and in each glob is a tiny, tiny beetle. This is the tree's effort to fight off the beetle infestation. It tries to push the beetle out from under the bark. Imagine if you were that tree with all those beetles crawling under your skin. That is what is happening beneath the bark of the tree. But there are so many beetles burrowing around under there that the tree is overwhelmed and it dies. So cutting the tree and the other ones about to suffer that fate is an act of mercy. And I feel good about sawing those logs and using that wood. We didn't want the trees to die, but they did. And the wood is a gift. So even though it is good to leave a few standing dead trees here and there for wildlife habitat, when so many are dying or about to die, it's a different matter. I think it is frankly disrespectful not to try and use the tree, and perhaps immoral not to do so, when every day we bring over truckloads of lumber from who knows where. So we know that we depend on trees, yet how do trees depend on each other? Well, the trees are here quite on their own. They evolved long before humans did. First the conifers, and then the deciduous trees. Back to Genesis, the story of Adam and Eve and the tree of knowledge is actually the second story of creation. The first story is different. In the first story, God created people on the sixth day, but God created trees on the third. And on the third day, God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so. I think the first story of creation as the story of evolution, where the days represent epochs of time, during some of which time the trees evolved. In evolution and in this first story of creation, the trees were here long before we were. Trees depend on each other. They are interdependent. Peter Wohlleben, as Bill read, in his book, The Hidden Life of Trees, best describes the way that trees interact with each other, generally in a helpful way. It's important to note, though, that many of the interactions between different species of trees are competitive, not just cooperative. How do we know that they compete? Well, in the forest, they grow upwards toward the light, each striving to be taller than its neighbor, and they have different strategies for growth. The pitch pine, for example, aims to be the first. The wind blows tiny seeds from its cones. These scatter and sprout upon any sunny patch of bare soil. Cut the tree and it sprouts from the stump. Fire? They're ready for that. They have sealed cones. And in a fire, the sap that seals the cone melts, and the seeds are released, making it the first tree to grow after the fire. The beech has another strategy. The beech is patient. It waits. It is shade tolerant, so its seedling will grow from a beech nut in the shade of other trees. And when the tree above it dies, the beech grows upward, reaching for the light. And then it begins to grow outward. It grows branches up and down its stem that cast shade. Its roots send out shoots that grow into other beech trees. The single beech becomes a grove of beeches, and these beeches cast shade so deep that no other plants can grow beneath them. In addition, their roots produce a toxin that is poisonous to other plants. So beeches help each other, but they don't necessarily help other trees. Excuse me. Yet trees do cooperate. When they grow in tight quarters, they shelter each other from the wind. They cause each other to grow straight, upward, towards the sky. They share nutrients with their roots. One tree that is thriving can, through its roots, transfer nutrients to a neighboring tree that is suffering. A tree that has plenty of water can offer water to one that is thirsty. They form mycorrhizal associations with soil fungi. Through their mycelia, the fungi vastly expand the absorbing capacity of the tree roots. The fungi extract a price from the tree, but for the tree, it's worth it. And this is really fascinating. Trees communicate. By emitting ethers, trees speak with these scented gases and help each other out. Can I have a glass of water? Thank you. Pardon me. Trees need, the speaker needs water, and trees do too. Sorry to the Zoom audience.
Your friend already mentioned.
I thought so. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Okay, thank you. And this is really fascinating. Trees communicate. By emitting ethers, trees speak. And with these scented gases, they help each other out. Let's say a family of giraffes begins to eat the leaves of a group of trees. The trees don't like that. So they give off a scent, and other trees downwind notice. These downwind trees produce chemicals that make their leaves taste bad. So when the giraffes reach those other trees, they try a few leaves and they are disgusted. And they walk off and they leave them alone. So trees are interdependent, yet they also engage animals in their interdependence. Do they engage us in that interdependence? Let's return to Genesis for a final time. God said to the man and the woman, "Have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth, but not over the trees." What is significant here is what is left unsaid, that we were not given dominion over the trees. And here comes the fascinating part about the interdependence of trees. Trees use animals to do their work. Let's consider oak trees and squirrels. In the fall, oaks drop acorns, squirrels scurry around, and they gather the acorns and bury them and save them for later. The squirrels actually remember where they buried these acorns, and they spend the winter eating the acorns. The ones that the squirrels forget are the ones that germinate and grow into oaks. But there's more to it than that. If the oak tree produced the same number of acorns each year, the squirrels would adapt and have enough babies so that there are always enough acorns for all the squirrels, and the squirrels would live happily ever after. But if that were the case, none of the acorns would survive and grow into oaks. To overcome this, the oaks have what are called mast years. And in a mast year, all the oaks in a given area, the island, for example, decide to produce a bounty of acorns. We don't know how they mutually agree to do this. We don't know when they will have a mast year, but that is what they do. And in that mast year, the ground will be strewn with acorns. Walking on a path is like walking on a living room rug when the children are playing with marbles. The squirrels bury the acorns, but there are so many acorns that they're the more than the squirrels can eat. So these forgotten acorns sprout and begin growing into oaks. The squirrels then have more babies than usual because life is so good. But they have made the wrong choice. For the next fall, the oaks have a dearth of acorns, and the squirrels go hungry. And many of them die. The squirrel population crashes. So the oaks use the squirrels to plant their acorns, and they also keep the squirrel populations in check. That is how trees use animals to do their bidding. How about that? I remember learning that and thinking, wow, the oaks are using those squirrels, and I felt quite superior. But then many years later, I started to think, wait a minute, I wonder if those oaks are using me. The squirrels ate the acorn, we ate the apple. Do plants use people? They do. Michael Pollan explores this theme in The Omnivore's Dilemma, where he describes the society that we have built up around cultivating one plant, corn. We're not really cultivating corn. It is corn that is using us to propagate itself. I started to wonder this about trees. Consider one of our native oaks, Quercus alba, the white oak. White oak is the wood for tight cooperage, and white oak is the wood for whiskey. The rules for bourbon require that it be stored in new barrels made only of white oak. Well, the oaks are onto this. And those who make whiskey realize that in the not too distant future, there will be a shortage of white oaks if we keep going at the rate we're going. So there was a new multi-state program with a board of directors and a conservation plan called the White Oak Initiative. This might be the forward thinking of the whiskey makers, but on the other hand, this might really be the subtle way that oaks, through whiskey, are used people to plant and grow and conserve and sustain more white oaks. So I've started to wonder if the trees use me. I was going to go to law school, but then I went to forestry school. And then I thought about going to business school, but then I worked for a conservation organization. So could the trees be using me? I've come to conclude that they are. And I submit, I yield, I have no dominion over trees, and I am happy to do their sylvan bidding in whatever way I may discern that it is. Trees are greater than we are, they are bigger, they are older, they have their wooden ways that we are only beginning to know and will never fully know. So with awe, with gratitude, with humility, and with reverence on this Earth Day and on this Arbor Day, may we all be the servants of trees.